What do you do when the other person gets defensive, escalates, refuses accountability, or keeps repeating unhealthy patterns? In part 2, we're talking about boundaries, repair, emotional maturity, and how to protect peace while creating a healthier connection in your marriage, family, and relationships. Stay tuned. Welcome to Fulfillment Therapy. I'm Kendra Nielson, wife, mom, and licensed therapist. Do you ever feel like you're doing everything right, but you're still exhausted and empty? Did you think life, marriage, and parenting would be simpler and more rewarding? Sometimes you just want to crawl back into bed and lose yourself in screen time and chocolate, rather than face that personal or family stress. You are not alone. This podcast helps you break free of the rat race and build a richer, more meaningful life, flourishing incrementally and realistically, improving your mental health and wellness, and living with deeper purpose beyond the mundane, no matter where you are in life's journey. Welcome back to part 2, my friends. Just a quick recap. In part 1, we discussed the nervous system responses, healthy versus toxic conflict, emotional regulation, and healthier communication tools. And in part 2, we're focusing more on what emotionally healthy conflict looks like in real-life relationships where emotions or family history or even the difficult family dynamics are involved. So here is question number 6 that she emailed me about specifics of conflict resolution that she was struggling with that I felt like I could answer for this podcast today. This question says the following: how do I set boundaries with a friend or family member without creating more drama? I know I've thought that to myself sometimes too. My husband and I both come from big families. He has 7 siblings, or there's 7 of them in a blended family, and there's 7 kids in my family as well. So it's always hard to know how to respond to certain people. Like, when do you let things go? When do you engage? When do you not? And not just family dynamics. Like, my daughter just called me from college and she said, "Mom, I don't know what to do. I'm in this ballroom setting situation with people. I'm always in my classes, and somebody asked to be my partner next year, and I'm not really comfortable with it." So I talked it through with her, and instead of just giving her answers, I said, "Well, how would you want him to respond to you if he had the same misgivings?" And she said, "Well, I'd want him to be honest with me." I'm like, "Okay, so what would you want him to say, and how would you want him to deliver it?" So we just role played that a little bit and talked through it, like what would be a good idea to talk about and how would be a good way to deliver it and what would not. And like we talked about in part 1, can we make it lighter and show that curiosity, or even share some of their strengths and build it up in a way that is emotionally intelligent and interpersonally intelligent, rather than just say, oh, they can just accept it or leave it. And one thing she kept coming back to in this example was like, well, I don't want him to just explode and get really defensive or really sensitive and then just be mad at me for the whole semester. I'm like, well, that's valid. And if you're delivering it in a way that is respectful and kind, and you're being honest and genuine, you're not responsible for the way he responds. If he chooses to respond that way, that's not on you. And that will just give you more information about what kind of relationship you want with this person moving forward. Like in this case, it'd probably be a good idea not to be his dance partner if he responds that way. You can apply that to yourselves too. Like, are you taking responsibility for how people respond? If you've really been careful to make sure you're emotionally regulated, to make sure that you are saying it in a respectful way and giving them the benefit of the doubt and still being curious and those types of things, or are you just saying it in a really abrasive way that, of course, is going to ruffle feathers? So we'll talk a little bit more about that. I do have to go into boundaries just a little bit more. I know I often bring up boundaries because they're that important. But to go off of what I talked about in part 1, boundaries help clarify things and they're not punishment. So it's like protecting the things that we value. But in the case of my daughter that I just shared, she really values having peace And she doesn't like that aggression in things. Most people do not. So she wants to work through conflict in respectful ways. And one of her concerns was that when he gets overwhelmed or stressed, like many of us do, he takes it out on people and he maybe blames or points fingers instead of taking some ownership. So in this case, she would need a boundary. Sometimes you just keep that to yourself. Like you have a certain line in the sand where if somebody crosses it, then you're going to do something, and you don't always have to communicate those boundaries depending on how close these people are to you. It's not always required. Most of the time we do communicate those boundaries. So in this case, it might be something where she, after the fact, when she's calm, she's not flooded, she might go back to him and say something like, hey, are you doing okay? Like, again, giving him the benefit of the doubt. You kind of snapped at me. I'm just checking in to see if everything's okay during the performance or during the practice. And then if he's like, yeah, sorry, or maybe he doesn't take any ownership, it could be something like, I'm not comfortable with that kind of response. If there is any problems or something that I did that you would like me to improve, if you would please come talk to me. And if that's not going to happen, then I'm going to A, B, or C. Not like in a way of like, I'm going to punish you, but like, I'm just going to have to step away, because when that happens, it impacts my performance, and I wouldn't want that for myself, but I wouldn't want that for anyone else either. You're getting very clear on your boundaries and what you will and will not tolerate from other people as far as behavior, and then communicating that in respectful ways. So again, it's not punishment, it's just your line in the sand. Now it can be very simple things like, I want to continue this conversation when we're both calmer. So whether that's with a friend, whether that's a family member, whether that's with your spouse, or it can be, I'm willing to talk about this, but not if we're yelling. Or simply, I care about this relationship and need the communication to stay respectful. I do have another example of this. I knew that this was in our marriage a while ago, a negative loop that we kept repeating, a negative pattern. And I knew that I was part of the problem. There built up resentments that we hadn't worked through, not all of them, even though we talked about them a lot. They were obviously still there. And so I decided, like, this has to not just be me telling him to stay calm. This involves a boundary on my part. So I'm going to very calmly tell him, hey, if your tone is getting a little sharp or your facial expressions because we're both counselors, we can say certain things that maybe you wouldn't say to your husband or your wife. But in our case, it was like, I can see contempt on your face, or I can see disdain or irritation, anger, any of those things. It would be best if we just like pause this for a minute. And in the past, that hasn't worked out very well. This time I said, I'll come back in a few hours or when we're both calm, until we can talk respectfully to each other. And then I left, and he kept trying to engage with me, because anytime you're trying to change a pattern where you both are very familiar with that negative loop or that dance, then they keep wanting to pull you back in. And mostly it's unintentionally. It's, no, we're doing our dance, you have to come back. That doesn't work. So I really tried to stay calm, and I did really well this time, because I've asked this before, and he's often the pursuer and I'm the one that will withdraw. And so he was afraid I was withdrawing and we weren't going to engage again. So I reassured him, I am going to come back and we can talk about this. But I know that even just for me, this is not going to go well if we continue this. And I had to say that 3, maybe even 4 times. And he kept almost trying to fight with me, like trying to pull me in with another activating thing to get me to engage. And I really had to be diligent, do some deep breathing in the moment, and just don't engage, like this little mantra in my head. And I didn't, and I stayed calm. Now, if I would have raised my voice too, then it would have been a signal to, okay, now let's do our dance again. It's just, you naturally want to get back into those old patterns. But instead, I really didn't. And even the follow-up later, I stayed calm. I personally have a prayer in my head all the time that I'll be wise, that I won't be prideful, that I'll stay calm. And that works when I do that, but I really have to work through it instead of jumping to old patterns. And this time it worked beautifully. It still took a while for him to calm down and to not be frustrated that I kept that boundary. even though it didn't seem like a boundary. He's like, well, he had reasons for wanting to do it, he said. But ultimately, when he wasn't flooded and in that fight, flight, or freeze, then he could see like, okay, that was more my side. And it's so much easier for the other side to see their side when you don't muddy it with you both interacting in that negative way. And I do want to say, if boundaries feel uncomfortable, it's likely because you're a people pleaser, because people pleasers especially don't like boundaries. It feels uncomfortable. Like I was having another conversation with a friend recently, and she was sharing about how all of her family members were wanting her to rearrange everything and travel a lot farther and do everything to accommodate their schedules. And I was like, wait a second, is this something that you would ever ask of them? And she's like, well, no. I'm like, well, that seems like people pleasing, but gently let her know that, hey, you don't have to over accommodate either. And it sounds like there's some boundaries that could be made. Like it's not fair for you to travel all this distance, pay all this money, and do more than your share to accommodate something that they could just shift in 1 hour or half an hour with minimal switching things instead of you having to go above and beyond for your family for several days to accommodate them. So just exploring like, hey, is this something that I would ask of other people? And if not, maybe there's likely a boundary there that needs to be established. And if this is you, it helps to think this. The reason boundaries are important is because they help protect relationships from resentment. Do you want to have more resentment in your marriage? Do you want to have more resentment in your relationships with your siblings or your friends? No, you want to protect those and make them special and free from that anger and festering wounds. So they are great ideas. They create connection. Boundaries help create emotional safety and not that emotional distance. So remember that. So here's her next question. What if the other person refuses to communicate maturely or keeps escalating? So like in the example of my husband a while ago, in that case, he kept escalating and I had to be the bigger person. And you're going to have to flip-flop this a lot. You're not always going to be the bigger person. And hopefully by you having more success stories, you're going to model for that other person too. Like, hey, you can respond this way even when I'm not always my best too. Often that happens. Don't just bask in the fact that you're always right and awesome. We both leapfrog in that way. But then what about if they're stonewalling or refusing to communicate? Those are honestly the hardest ones ever because you can't control somebody else and you might have very pure intentions. The hardest lessons I've ever learned involved that, like people responding very poorly and refusing to engage, and it felt very hurtful. Like I can honestly say the most distressing experiences involving loved ones came when somebody was refusing to engage and refusing to work through conflict. And those lessons hurt. There's not a lot we can do there except for fostering some acceptance, like letting go of the fact that you can't control that and you can only own your part. You can try to make amends, and if they will not, you can try it again maybe later after you give them some space, and if they still will not, then that's likely a relationship that is not healthy for you to engage in that time anyway. And the more that you care and obsess over it and overdo it, the more power it gives them in a sense. Not that it's this power struggle, but it doesn't have to be that heavy or that big. You want to be able to set it down and let it go in a way so it doesn't rule your life. That acceptance brings peace, knowing that you can't always control the outcome, and that's okay. That's part of the human experience. So unfortunately, my friends, you cannot force emotional maturity. You cannot force accountability, but you can model what that looks like to the best of your ability. Some of them you may not see very much, and that's okay. Just try not to be that one that's like snub about it, that like I was the bigger person or I handled that well and you did not. Just like a gentle kindness and letting go and acceptance. Try to think of a mentor that you really admire that can do that and really does have that humility. But humility doesn't mean letting people walk all over you. I had a really challenging experience with a friend that I had grown close to, and they responded like this. Very much shut down, said it was totally our fault, didn't want anything to do with us, never explained. We owned our part. We tried to make it right. We really tried to work through it. They refused, never even shared what the thing was, which made it even worse. I was like, if this is something that I did that was wrong, I would love to fix it so I don't unknowingly do it to somebody else. And they just refused. She reached out one other time, and I was very hopeful, very excited to work through it. And ultimately, it just ended the same way in that brief interaction with her just saying, no, it's all you. We didn't do anything wrong. And I'm like, that's not what this is about. There's always two sides to every story. It's about each owning our side and moving forward. And that doesn't even mean in a relationship. That just means working through things and recognizing there's always two different narratives. It's not about who's good, who's bad, who's right, who's wrong. But ultimately, it did come down to me just having to have some acceptance. But also, the part that I didn't really think about is standing up for yourself a little bit too. If you're going to be so humble and trying to be the bigger person and not set any boundaries or not share your experience a little bit, not that you have to go into great depth, but it's hard to move on too. I would encourage you also not to be a doormat. So in that situation, ultimately I said what we really value in relationships and friendships is when there's conflict, working through it, talking about it, discussing those resentments or things as they come up, and working through it in a way that's fair to both sides. And there's some accountability and there's some ownership. And if that can't happen on both sides, honestly, this isn't a relationship that we're interested in either. And I didn't say that out of malice or hurt. It was very much at that point a place of, it's okay. Like, if that's not something you are willing to do or can do, that's okay. I appreciate you reaching out. And that's something that we really need and value in a relationship. Like, that's my boundary. And if that can't happen, then this is not something I'm willing to engage in anymore. And it wasn't until that part, so like that boundary and also being humble, but still, I guess in a sense, advocating for ours, for me and my husband, that I was able to move on. If we're just a doormat and we're just trying to be humble or the bigger person only, like it can go both ways, right? Being very prideful and it's like, it's all you. And being, oh, it's all me and I'm so sorry. And just being way too accommodating and accepting of poor behavior or mistreatment. Neither one is going to help you heal. So just really quickly, these things to remember. Really focus on staying on your side of the street, the things that you can change, what you can do, not matching their escalation. Like in the situation with my husband a while ago, when he was getting more activated, not jumping in and doing it too. Disengaging respectfully, whether with my husband or our friends. Like, you know what? It's okay. Like this acceptance. And after you shared your needs, your desires, your boundaries, if those things aren't respected or acknowledged, maybe that's okay to step back from that relationship for a while or potentially forever if it's not something you need to engage in. And then protecting your emotional safety. Now, this can be a little bit complicated because some people say they're setting up boundaries and they're not letting you in your life to protect themselves. Well, a lot of times when I see this with my clients, it's actually an unwillingness to engage and to manipulate and to have the upper hand instead of it being a healthy boundary. If you're just mad at a sibling or a parent and you're like, I don't like how you did that, so I'm creating a boundary and I'm not going to interact with you anymore. Is that a healthy boundary or is that just an unwillingness to work through conflict and hear both sides of the story and respectfully work through that? And you have to be willing to take an honest look at yourself to decide what it really is and even get feedback from people you really respect, not as a way to gossip and to fuel the fire from other people, you know, when you are and when you're not. Maybe somebody that knows nothing about this and doesn't just tell you what you want to hear, but somebody that would give you honest feedback if you were in the wrong. Like my husband does that for me a lot. So in the case of our friends, I had him review what I was saying to her before I said it to make sure that I was in the right or if I was off a little bit. And he gave me some good feedback and I implemented that before sharing that when I was calm. I never raised my voice. I was never rude or unkind. And I really wanted to make sure that that's where I was at before I responded to anything. What really helps me is to think of that mentor, that person you really respect, and think, okay, how would they respond? Because remember, calmness is not weakness. And walking away from that toxic escalation can be very wise. In the case of most of our disagreements, most likely with a partner that's not healthy to engage in the moment, or even with friends or something else, but we can return to later. Now, there's some people that just don't get riled up. Like they can be just sworn at and chewed out by somebody in the community and they'll stay totally calm. I admire those people, but I can just feel my heart rate increase. And I think most of us have some sort of activation with that. So take a minute before you engage with that because you'll likely regret what you've done if you respond in that way. And again, just give them a gentle reminder without feeding that fire that you both want to jump into in the moment in the heat of the anger. Something like, I would love to continue this conversation when we can both communicate calmly, or we can both be respectful to each other, or we can both be very aware of our nonverbals and the message that we're sending. Something simple like that. Question number 8. How do I repair things after I said something hurtful in the heat of the moment? Such a good question, because I feel like there are 2 types of people generally. There's usually one partner that does this a lot more and one that does this a lot less. But ultimately, we're both apologetic for the things that we said, and it's very important to repair this to not create much bigger wedges over time. Repair is one of the strongest predicators of healthy relationships. I've mentioned the Gottmans before, but they share that if you don't repair and you have that contempt and you let that fester, that's one of the biggest causes of divorce or rupture in any relationship. So it's really important to repair. Please remember that healthy relationships are not conflict-free. Some of the healthiest marriages I know of work through conflict all the time, but they can do it in a way that doesn't feel so devastating or emotionally charged because they're wise about when they do it and they apply these principles. They wait a little bit, they think about it, they take ownership, they take accountability, they have that curiosity. They give people the benefit of the doubt. They recognize there's 2 sides to every story. So even if they think it's very clear on their side, they can acknowledge that they didn't grow up in the same way the other person did, most likely. And so they might see the world through a different lens. And that can be very beautiful. But if you're so insistent that your way is right, your communication and your relationships and connection are really going to suffer. It's also very important to take accountability without excuses. I did this because I wouldn't have done that except for this one could even be hard for me to stop there. I'm sorry, but try to leave the but out of it. I'm so sorry. And generally they ask questions or the conversation continues where you can share a little bit more about your why. That doesn't sound like an excuse and you can grow in understanding. So there's a difference between seeking understanding and just having excuses all the time. It's also important to validate the other person's experience. If you're not going to validate, they don't feel heard and understood, and then it will often just continue that fight or that resentment. And over time of you practicing this, that will change behavior. I'm going to give you a few repair statements that often help my clients and that I've used before too. Here's a few. I can see how my tone hurt you. I got defensive and I reacted poorly. I wish I would have handled that differently. And then even if you can share what you could have handled differently. Repair matters so much more than pretending that conflict never happened. And I feel like I can do this so much better with my kids, but generally with my clients, and even myself, it's so much easier with younger children, maybe, or even a stranger, than with a partner generally. Okay, question number 9. How do I stop replaying arguments over and over afterward? That is a great question. Some of them are really hard. It's hard to let go. It's hard to move forward. I completely understand that. Those key ones with some relationships that I'm so sad that didn't move forward, I still replay those so much more than the smaller conflicts between friends that we work through. So some of them, like I said, it just goes back to acceptance. And maybe you're somebody that has a lower self-esteem or struggles more with anxiety. So this might be more of an issue for you. When we ruminate, that keeps the nervous system activated and that makes repair even more difficult. So it's important that we step out of that as much as we can. Like if you just go on AI and search for ways to help with rumination, or even some CBT, that's cognitive behavioral therapy tools on how to manage that rumination, that can really help. They're just simple ways to basically put your thoughts on trial and to shift your thoughts into more productive or adaptive thinking that can help you get out of that rumination. But when we get stuck and we try to replay that conflict over and over, that's just a way to try to control a situation. And often it can lead to gossip and further issues like triangulation or enmeshment or control, like nothing that we want to do unless you're talking productively to like a mentor or journaling, doing something like that to process it and not to stay in that rumination. So some helpful strategies are journaling or grounding exercises like meditation or just being more present and in the moment. It could be movement. Movement always works really well for me. It could be reality checking, like asking what part is mine? What can I release? Or even some of those putting your thoughts on trial things or those CBT exercises that I talked about. And then again, talking to an emotionally safe person, not somebody that's going to fuel the fire. And you'll probably notice that when conflict happens, especially if it's happened with somebody that there's been some previous things that have had some wedges, then this current conflict might activate some of those older wounds, and then it starts getting historical. And the more you bring up all these other things, the more it's going to be hard to get out of that pattern and resolve this thing and move forward. So there are times to maybe bring up the past, but generally try to keep it to one thing. Otherwise, it gets bigger and bigger than it needs to be. Her next question was, how can I disagree with someone I love without damaging the relationship? Some people are so much better at this than others, but emotional maturity allows room for differences. Some of my favorite people, they're mentors to me and they model this, that they can have all sorts of friends that have different perspectives and they can embrace those differences instead of being threatened by them. And that does take emotional maturity and wisdom and leaning into that discomfort a little bit and exploring more of what that means about you than what it means about them. So disagreement doesn't always equal rejection. Another friend and I were just talking about this, like, oh, I'm just not sure if this one of our mutual friends is mad at me when I have a different opinion. And I just laughed and I said, I used to feel that way too, but the more I'm around this friend, the more I realize that it's almost like this long-time sibling relationship, that you just love them for who they are and you start to see their differences as cute things about them, quirks, things that you appreciate over time, and you can let it go. But that comes from continuing to engage and have conversations and work through things. Then it becomes less threatening over time. And I have to say here that it's also really important to listen instead of forming a rebuttal in your mind, because that's also not going to go anywhere productive. And you always know if the other person is doing that, if they're actually engaged in listening or they're just waiting to jump in and share their argument. And I've been on both sides of that for sure. You don't have to think exactly alike just to love and respect each other. We can arrive at different things in different ways, and that's okay, and even to be celebrated. Her next question we've kind of answered, but I'll go over it briefly. She said, what does healthy conflict resolution actually look like in real life? So that's pausing before reacting. That's apologizing. That's staying respectful, regulating those emotions, asking questions with curiosity, taking breaks, listening without interrupting, protecting connection during disagreement, having boundaries. There's many of these things. All of them are aspects of that healthy communication. And if you don't think you've had conflict, you might be in that camp. There's not many of them, but in that camp where you are having conflict, but you don't even see it as conflict. Because healthy conflict is usually quieter and even slower than what many people grew up around. So maybe you are having conflict that you don't see as conflict and it's just normal communication, and that's great. It means that maybe you did have some good mentors, or maybe you're working through it intuitively more than you realized. Just in closing, you do not need a perfect family history to create healthier relationships moving forward. You just need a willingness and some humility, and I gotta say, a lot of prayer. Even if you're not big in the whole God thing, I don't care what you want to do, but some sort of mantra in your mind definitely helps. Emotional health is built over time through the small, repeated things that you do. I'm still practicing. Sometimes I'm white knuckling it even, keeping my mouth shut and just very calmly saying, why don't we come back to this when we're both more calm, when this can be more productive, and not engaging in any of those things that are thrown out there. It's almost like he's fishing and he's trying to pull me back in with that really attractive bait. And I take it every time, but more and more I'm not engaging. And then it's so much easier to repair quickly because we didn't mess up that first step. And remember, every success that you have creates healthy marriages. Those ripple effects in not just your marriage, but in your parenting, your friendships, and future generations. So it's worthwhile. With just one healthy conversation at a time, you really can create something different. Different family patterns, different generational patterns that do ripple out. I promise you. Still practicing it, but we all are really. And don't get discouraged by comparing yourself to somebody else. Like I was just on a trip with some college roommates, and my one dear friend just says that she really doesn't have like almost any conflict with her husband. And I'm like, what would that be like? And yet my husband and I were drawn to this field for a reason, because we both grew up in homes with high conflict in different ways, or maybe even poor resolution skills as far as working through things instead of just shutting down. So we're learning a lot of this stuff for the first time in certain areas. Other areas are totally fine, but in certain areas, we're learning how to do it in better ways. And sometimes we wish we were so far ahead, and we're not always. And the things that we're learning, we then take to our audiences, like this podcast or my clients. This is very human. We're all struggling in different ways, and maybe some are a little further ahead in this, but not in other ways around you. Well, my friends, I'm so grateful you joined me today for this conversation. Thank you for joining us for this second part. Remember, this takes practice. It's not a one and done thing, especially if it wasn't modeled for you before. Every small shift can create more peace, more fulfillment, more connection in your family life and in your family of origin, in your own family, in your friendships and otherwise. You might be just the person that models for somebody else how to respond in more emotionally mature ways, in ways that will create a greater partnership, in ways that will create better parenting, and on and on. So thank you for being here today. I will see you back here every Monday with a new episode. And don't forget to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, because those reviews help us reach more people. We appreciate all of your support, and we'll see you back here soon. Hey friends, if you enjoyed this episode, a quick 30-second share can help someone else find support and help this podcast grow. Leaving a review on Apple Podcasts boosts visibility and keeps the show alive. Your simple acts make a big difference. I'll see you back here each week for more life-changing episodes.